now that we're, just at the 1 anniversary virtually, a couple of weeks from where we sat today talking, a year has passed. I think I could probably tell my story, and it had some interesting aspects even for me, and some surprising things happened that I didn't expect. And so maybe it's okay to tell that story now. And
go ahead, Dallas.
I think I can do that probably. To set the stage, you finish in Boston on a street called Boston Street that runs right beside Copley Square, which is a little green space in Boston, and so it's over to your right. And then the street that borders the other side of the park or the square is called St. James Street. So you finish on Boston Street just about the time you get to Copley Square. And then immediately all the marathoners stop running, and now they're drifting like zombies in the street, just full of people sort of drifting on down Boston Street, past a place where you get a bottle of water and where they hand you your medal and they hand you a little Mylar blanket to put around you to stay warm and so forth. And then you keep on going because you're looking for a school bus. And there are hundreds of them parked down that street and down the side streets as well. You're looking for the one that has your warm-up clothes on it, which you checked in at Hopkinton, 26 miles away where the race started. And I also had my cell phone in those warm-up clothes. So that's the way you finish. This little green space in Boston, bordered by St. James Street and expensive hotels, high-rise hotels, luxury hotels. And so when I was running the race, along about 16 or 17 miles into it, I saw things going desperately wrong. As I say, I was trying to run well because I wanted to compete for first place. But a marathon surprises you in many ways. No matter how many times you run a marathon, you still may be surprised. It's like a mystery theater.
Right.
You know, the curtain goes up, and somewhere in the miles down the road, you begin to find out what's going to happen.
Right.
But you just have to run it to find out. You can't predict it, or at least I can't. What happened to me was I started getting leg cramps, severe leg cramps. Well, I'd experienced that before, so I doubled up on water, started drinking more water, and I doubled up on salt. I carry little salt packs and wear a pair of shorts that has little pockets in the back, so I keep salt packs in there. Sort of doubled up on the salt. I felt like I needed electrolytes and plenty of water, and I drank Gatorade too to get some more electrolytes. So after doing that a couple of miles, the cramps did ease up a little bit. But another equally worse problem began to happen about that time. I noticed my vision was getting very blurred, which had never happened in a marathon before. And despite the fact of drinking more water and more electrolytes, it continued to get worse and worse. It was finally got so bad that I couldn't recognize faces. I couldn't make out any details. I could just see the broad outline of things. And I was expecting my daughter to be out on the course somewhere, and I was thinking I'll look for her, but you know, I realized I couldn't see her even if she were standing there. I could see my way to run down the street because it was lined with people on both sides, so all you had to do was stay between the lines of people. And the vision problem continued to get worse until I finally crossed the finish line, and then I couldn't see well enough to even find the school bus that had my warm-up clothes on it. So drifting along with all the other marathoners, you know, I asked for help a time or two. I said, what number is that school bus there? They had placards on the windshield, signs about this big with a range of numbers that included your bib number you were wearing. So all you had to do was find the one that had your bib number. Well, I kept on walking down there, and the blast hasn't happened yet because I finished about 20 minutes before the blast. And as I walked on down there, I learned that if I got over close to the bus, so the bus is on the left and bus is on the right, if I got close to the bus, I could actually see the number on the windshield well enough to make it out. So I finally did find my bus. And then they passed the bag of clothes through an open window, and so I was standing there with my clothes, and I started getting out my my pants to try to put them on, but every time I'd lift my leg up to try to put my pants on, it would cramp severely. And I'd have to straighten it out, you know, and stand there and rub and grimace and so forth. And so a couple of volunteers saw me struggling and came over and said, you need to go to the medical tent. I said, well, I think I'll be all right. Just help me get my pants on, you know. And so they helped me a little bit, and I finally got my pants on, but I was still struggling. And finally, they had had enough of it. So one of them got a wheelchair and brought it over there and shoved it up at me and said, here, we're going to the medical tent. I think I was about that close because you just finished a marathon, and it's just such a blessed thing just to sit down and relax for a minute. Just sit down in the chair and let them push me up to the medical tent, and they'll put me under warm blankets. It was cold. They'll put me under warm blankets, and they'll put an IV in my arm, and everything will be fine. Here in a few minutes, I'll take a nap. You know, it was so tempted. It was so tempting. I was so close. Finally, I said, no, I don't think so. I think I'll just go on, thank you, you know. And so I just refused, basically. But then I realized that I still had a problem. I wanted to go meet my daughter, and she was supposed to be waiting in the Westin Hotel, which was just across the Copley Square from the finish line. And I had told her that when I finish the race, I'll get my warm-up clothes and I'll have my cell phone in there and I'll send you a text message. Well, I got my warm-up clothes, but of course I couldn't operate the phone to send the text message. I couldn't see well enough or anything. But finally, I asked one of the volunteers, a young woman from Boston University, actually. I asked her, I said, would you help me find the Westin Hotel? You know, I didn't feel like I could see well enough to safely walk around. And so she was a volunteer and was there to help people. So yeah, she was glad to do that. So she took me by the hand, lead me through the dense crowd of people. And so we started walking back toward the finish line. We were walking toward the finish line where the blast occurred. But before we got to the finish line, about a block there, maybe 2 blocks, we turned on the corner to go on across the street over to St. James. St. James is a street that was designated for family meeting area. And it was even blocked off with letters of the alphabet, so to help you find your runner, you know. So all the families were waiting over there. So we headed over to St. James, just turned the corner to go onto a cross street, and then there was a big blast. And what I said was, I said, that doesn't sound good, because I couldn't think of anything it could be except a bomb. I've later learned that some people thought it was a cannon, that it was part of the festivities, like they shoot a cannon here when the football team scores and so forth. But I knew it wasn't a cannon because I'd been there several times before, and I'd never seen them use a camera for part of the festivities. And it certainly wasn't a construction crew somewhere blasting, because it's a state holiday. It's Patriots Day in Massachusetts. All the kids are out of school, and downtown Boston has, you know, a couple of million people in it probably. So I knew there wasn't a construction project going on in the middle of all that. I couldn't think of anything except a bomb. And so we continued to try to make our way over to St. James, and about this time emergency vehicles started arriving, and they were blasting through a sea of people. St. James Street, for example, was just full of people, and there would be a siren, and then the crowd would just part, and here would come a fire truck or a motorcycle or a car just blasting through, racing. It was really dangerous. And so I was glad I had the young lady guiding me around, frankly. And I gave my phone to her for her to try to text my daughter, because I didn't know where my daughter was in all this. I was hoping, and you know Jill, my daughter, I was hoping that she was in the Westin Hotel waiting for me, but I didn't know for sure. And turned out it was closer than I thought. But I handed my phone to the Boston University student to send a text message for me, but she couldn't send one. You couldn't get a text message out because the system evidently was just jammed. And we heard, and I don't know if it's true or not, that they shut the system down because they were afraid the bombs were being triggered by cell phones, and they were afraid there were more bombs. But then later read that that wasn't true. I don't know. All I know is we couldn't send a text message. So we just had to keep on working our way through the crowd until we finally got to the Westin Hotel. And when we got there, indeed my daughter was there. So we had made plans to meet there in case we had trouble, and so I was glad I made that advanced plan. But turned out she had a closer call than I did, in that she was down in the crowd near the finish line to watch me finish. But she was also with a friend of mine from Livingston, Anita Burnett, and her husband is a running friend of mine, and Lynn Burnett, and Lynn is a better runner than I am. He's a fast runner, but he didn't have a good race up there. And that's typical in marathons. So he only finished 2 minutes before the blast. So they stayed in the crowd until Lynn finished, and then they left the crowd. And then immediately the blast occurred. So they were down there up until just before the blast. Well, it goes on. There are many postscripts. I'll tell you one right now, is that my daughter, Jill, had never been to Boston before, and she didn't know her way around. I was compromised, so I couldn't find my way around. And so she had to lead me by hand, because we weren't staying in the Westin Hotel. That was just our meeting place. Our hotel was a half a mile away from there. So we left that hotel, left the Westin Hotel to eventually go to our own hotel. And as soon as we got outside the door, we saw they had the streets blocked off. So the soldiers were already there in their camouflage and with the M16s and so forth. They had shut the town down already. And that included a lot of hotels, because a lot of the hotels there connect through walkways and whatnot to a big shopping center there. I think it's called Hancock Center, I'm not sure, but it's a big high-rise shopping center. And so they were shutting down restaurants, hotels, all access to the center of town and the streets too. So we walked out of the Westin to head to our hotel, and all the streets were blocked. And I told Jill, I said, maybe we better just go back in the Westin. At least it's warm and we can have shelter in there.
Right.
And the FBI were already swarming all over that building. We turned around to go back into the Westin. They'd already closed it. We couldn't go back in. So we had no choice but to try to find our own hotel. And Jill led me by hand, and with me giving her clues, we finally got there. And I started taking a shower. And one of the most amazing things, I really want to make sure that I commend all the emergency helpers and the police and everything else. I was taking a shower, and before I got out of the shower of this hotel, half a mile away from the blast zone, there were 2 police officers in our room interviewing Jill about a suspicious man she had seen.
Wow.
That quickly, they were collecting that kind of information.
Wow.
And it just astonished me, you know.
Right.
So I was really impressed at the response of all of the emergency people. They were there very quickly, and they were very thorough. And so that was a very interesting experience.
Well, let me ask you, did your vision clear up with the
Oh, yeah, I
Boston?
was talking about the vision problem. It did clear up, actually, overnight. And I felt like it would. It had never happened in a marathon before. And I've even talked to my ophthalmologist. I've talked to all kinds of doctors, and I really don't have an answer as to why that happens. I do know that it's happened to ultra runners before, because I'll see mention of it in a blog, you know, about somebody's vision getting blurry. I don't know that I've ever seen anyone talk about their vision being as blurry as mine is. It's not a blackout, it's more like a whiteout, like you're looking through a shower curtain or a frosted glass. You can make out the broad outlines of things. So imagine the shower scene in Psycho or something, you know, you could see. You could see through the curtain a little bit, right? And that's kind of the way my vision was. And it didn't alarm me. You'd think I would be alarmed. It didn't alarm me, I just had to deal with it. It had happened twice before, but both times in ultramarathons where you're out for hours and hours, and maybe in cold conditions. Maybe your blood sugar gets very low. I don't know what causes it. And the first time it happened was, about 14 years ago in a 100-mile race across the Flint Hills of Kansas. And I was running by myself at night, just a little point of light, you know, a little flashlight running through a vast prairie, and started getting blurry. And it got worse and worse. And finally, toward the end, I could barely see anything. And that was the first time it happened. And I will tell you about the soul of a runner.
Yeah.
Which that reminds me of, and I've thought about this a lot. I have in my history something like a dozen eye surgeries for traumatic, massive retinal detachments. And not to go into the mechanics of all that, but I'm lucky I can be here and seeing today. Anyway, in the Kansas race, when it started happening, I felt like some of the surgery that was used to repair my retinas had come undone. And so I really, truly thought I had ruined myself. And when I finally crossed the finish line, I did that race in 24 hours and 6 minutes. So I fell short of my goal. I was trying to do it in 24 hours, run 100 miles in one day, right?
Right.
That's a good round number, 100 miles one day. Well, I overshot my goal by 6 minutes. And when I crossed the finish line, there was no one there. It was just in the dark. There was a man and a woman, a husband and wife. The husband was the race director. He was ringing a cowbell. And he said, good run. You didn't make 24, but good run anyway. I said, thank you very much. And then I was just standing there in the dark by myself because I didn't know what to do. Finally, I said, I've lost my vision. And his wife turned out to be a nurse. And she came over and took a hold of me and guided me about a quarter of a mile to where my truck was parked in a field. And she said, it might be cornea edema. She had done some ultra running herself. She said, it might be cornea edema. She says, if it is, it'll clear up overnight. The truth is, I was so tired and cold, I didn't care what it was. I just got in my sleeping bag. It was already spread out in the back of my truck and went to sleep. And the next morning, I got up, I could see. Hallelujah, I could see. It was amazing.
Wow.
Because I didn't know. I was thinking, they're going to have to take me to an emergency room somewhere, Kansas City or somewhere. Who's going to drive me there? I was traveling by myself.
Right.
How am I going to get my truck home? I was thinking about all these problems. That was after I finished the race. Before I finished the race, you know what I was thinking about? Even though I could barely find my way and I was afraid I would miss a turn and go off into the prairie and be lost, and it was life-threatening because it was cold. I frostbitten my fingers. What I was thinking about? I was thinking about 24 hours. I was thinking about meeting my goal. I was thinking about doing the best I could to finish that race as fast as I could, and I was pushing as hard as I could to do that. You'd think a guy in that kind of condition would be thinking about stopping and getting medical help immediately. I don't think most runners would do that. I think most runners would do exactly what I did. I think they would have kept on pushing to try and finish that race. No matter what happens, I'm going to finish this race, and I'm going to finish it the best I can.
Why is that, Dallas?
Anyway, that was the first time that the vision problem happened.
Yeah.
And it was in an ultra marathon and with an all-night run. It happened just about a year ago in another ultra marathon, but it had never happened in a race as short as a marathon. I just wasn't expecting it. And it happened of all places, not in a remote location, but in this urban place, this urban, sophisticated place. My ophthalmologist said, the next time that happens, see if you can get the pressure measured. I'm thinking, she's just not visualizing this situation here. Everything is closed down in Massachusetts. There's nothing open, in school. The offices are closed, school kids are out. I couldn't find an ophthalmologist anywhere in Massachusetts. I'd have to go to New Jersey or someplace.
Right.
But no, I don't know what caused the vision problem, but I only knew that the 2 times before when it had happened, it cleared up overnight. And so it's debilitating, I can tell you that, and you have to have help when that happens. And so the last time it had happened, someone did have to drive me back to a hotel, and I was able to go back to the hotel I'd spent the night in the night before, and they had the same room available, so I knew where everything was already. So you have to have help when that happens, but fortunately, runners and people around races are helpful people, and generous people, so that worked. So that was the vision problem, and it did clear up the next day. And then what happened was, all of downtown Boston was roped off, and they had barricades at all the streets that might go in there, and those barricades were manned by soldiers and with the M16s and so forth. And Lynn and Anita Burnett, who I mentioned before, they came to our hotel and to take a walk. So we went walking in the Back Bay area of Boston. So we were just north of all this blocked off area downtown Boston, sort of skirting the perimeter and just walking. And there are all these beautiful row houses. I guess you'd call them brownstone. Some people call them over in the Back Bay area. It's fascinating for a Tennessee boy to walk around and look at. And Lynn and I both had on our Boston Marathon jackets. And we were walking down the street there, just sort of drifting along, Lynn and I, and Anita and Jill. And a young woman came out of her house with 2 long-stemmed red roses and gave one to me and gave one to Lynn and thanked us for coming to Boston and running the Boston Marathon. It was a touching
Yeah.
moment, I thought, and a touching thing for her to do. What a generous thing. And so Lynn and I went walking down the street holding these red roses. And about a block later, we came to a barricade manned by a couple of soldiers in uniform and everything. And I walked up to the barricade, and the soldier walked over, and I handed him the rose, and I said, "A lady just gave me this rose, and thanks for running the marathon. I want to give it to you, and thank you for your service." So I walked away and left the soldier standing there holding
great.
a red rose, and maybe he was able to go home that night and give it to his wife. I don't know, but it was. I felt like it was a generous gesture, and it was one that I appreciated, and I wanted to pass it on somehow. That's one of the footnotes to
Yeah.
Boston. There's one other footnote that I might share with you
Which
if you
is-
think it's appropriate. After I came back to Tennessee, I didn't feel like I wanted to write about the event in any
Right.
ways. I've already explained. I was interviewed on a radio station where I talked about it a little bit, but Josh Haidt, who was traveling with me, and you know he's an elite marathoner
Yes.
and sometimes wins overall. Most recently he won the Cummins Falls Marathon. He and I were both up there. We weren't traveling together that year. The previous 2 years we had been. My daughter was traveling with me last year, but Josh and I were both up there last year, and so we were together on a radio station where they interviewed us a little bit. And what I told people for 4 months was that I was fourth in my age division. And if you're a racer, you realize very quickly, fourth is the worst possible place to finish a race. You would rather be dead last than
Yes.
fourth, because you're so tantalizingly close
Right.
to getting on the podium, to getting an age group award or whatever, but you're just out of the action. I told everyone I was fourth, but I knew it wasn't true. I knew it wasn't true because Boston had incredibly made an error in my time. It wasn't a big error, but it was enough to make the difference in whether I was fourth or third. Given all that had happened at Boston, I just didn't feel like complaining about that. They did have, on their webpage, they have a special page set up for where you can correct errors, or at least
Right.
present the evidence that you have, and they will take a look at it. And I did that. It's just a routine thing to do. But I didn't expect anything to happen, because visualize what the Boston Athletic Association had to do. They had all 5,000 of these people out on the race course. They had to figure out how to handle them, how to make some way possible for them to register next year so that they could get back without having to qualify again. They had to set up the software for doing all that.
Right, right. It's huge.
They must have been completely overwhelmed. And so I didn't feel like they had time to address my little problem. But then I came in the summer, about 4 months later, I came back from a run one morning, went walking up the yard, and there was a brown package sitting on the porch, and it was from the Boston Athletic Association. And it was the third place award, a little vase, kind of like the one I brought with me today for you to
Right.
look at. A little vase, and that's much more important than you realize.
Yes.
Aside from the hardware, if you get on the podium, then you're invited back next year as a complimentary entry. And so the fact that they did correct my time and I did get third place officially, then I was invited back and given complimentary entry for this year's race. And so it was a big deal to me, and it was one I didn't want to fuss about, given all that had happened.
Right.
But the point I want to make is that the Boston Athletic Association, in spite of all they had that they were dealing with, they corrected that error. And so again, I am just so, appreciative of the Boston Athletic Association. And it looks to me like their integrity is just beyond question.
Right.
And so when you run the Boston Marathon, and you take your time away from there, once it becomes official, by golly, I think it's going to be right. And I really appreciate the way they corrected that.